My name is Janet Gornick. I'm professor of political science and sociology at the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm also director of the Stone Center on Socio-Economic Inequality, a research center based at the Graduate Center. Among its many activities, the Stone Center houses the U.S. Office of LIS, the well-known cross-national data archive located in Luxembourg. LIS, as it's known, is a valuable and widely used resource for research on socioeconomic inequality. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to introduce you to LIS. I'll summarize its structure, activities, and programs. I'll describe the data and explain how to access them. And I'll close with a brief empirical presentation that will illustrate the scope and flexibility of the data. I'm in a position to tell you about LIS, I'm happy to say, because I've been involved with LIS for just over 30 years. From 1990 till 2005, I wore a variety of hats: staff member, instructor, associate director. From 2006 to 2016, I had the pleasure of serving as LIS's director, and now I direct the Stone Center, which, as I mentioned, houses LIS's only satellite office, the U.S. Office of LIS. LIS exists to support cross-national research conducted by a diverse community of international academics, students, policymakers, and others concerned with socioeconomic inequality. This slide, taken from the LIS website, summarizes its mission, and that is to enable, facilitate, promote, and conduct cross-national comparative research on socioeconomic outcomes and on the institutional factors that shape those outcomes. The images on this slide, also taken from the LIS website, summarize the types of research that are most often carried out using the LIS data, and those include studies on levels and trends in income inequality, poverty, a range of employment outcomes, and households, assets, and debt. And across all of these areas, many LIS researchers assess the policy factors that shape those outcomes. Let me give you a brief overview of the structure of LIS. LIS was founded in 1983 by an international and interdisciplinary team of social scientists. When LIS was first put together in the 1980s, nearly every aspect of LIS, from the harmonized microdata to the availability of channels that enabled remote access to those data, was revolutionary in the world of data and research. For those of you interested in that intellectual and organizational history, a 30-minute video describing the founding of LIS exists and is lodged on the LIS website. LIS is an independent nonprofit organization. It's governed by an international board made up of representatives from the 50+ participating countries and some of the supranational organizations that support LIS. It's important to note that the data and all the technical work is done in Luxembourg, where the headquarters is sitting. The team in Luxembourg acquires and harmonizes and disseminates the data for research. I'm going to tell you about that in more detail in a few minutes. It's also a venue for research, workshops, conferences, and user training. The director of LIS now is Daniele Checchi, an Italian labor economist. And here in New York, we have the Stone Center, which includes, as I mentioned, the U.S. Office of LIS. It's a satellite office of LIS, and it was founded in 2006 and folded into the Stone Center when the Stone Center was launched in 2016. As we've noted, we're located here at the Graduate Center of CUNY. And the office in the U.S. provides administrative, managerial, and development support for LIS. And the Stone Center, with the U.S. office as its core component, is also a venue for research, teaching, workshops, PhD supervision, and public programs. What is it that LIS does? I'm going to tell you the story of what LIS does, describing it in a fairly simplified version of 5 steps. First of all, the team in Luxembourg starts by identifying appropriate data sets. These data sets are based on national household surveys, although some of the data sets included in LIS in the harmonized databases are augmented by or include administrative data that's added by the national data providers, not by LIS. It's important to note that the main ingredient in the LIS data sets is the household survey. The LIS staff locates these data sets through many channels, including searching the websites of data providers around the world, participating in international data networks, and building ties with LIS's data users, and so on. When I say that they search for appropriate data sets, I mean, in short, data sets that are based on surveys that are nationally representative and of demonstrably high quality. And they also have to contain the needed variables, which for the most part means that they have to contain income and/or wealth data that are both comprehensive and also highly disaggregated. Second, The team negotiates with the data providers one by one to acquire these data sets and bring them to the office in Luxembourg. Of course, these data sets have been anonymized, meaning that the data providers have removed names and addresses and other identifying information. But because they include households' economic data, the data sets in almost all of these countries are subject to stringent restrictions related to handling and disseminating the data. LIS has spent decades gaining the trust of data providers around the world, and they've done that by designing and implementing stringent confidentiality and security protections. The third step, the most important, the core of the work done at LIS's real value added, is that the data team then harmonizes these data sets, which have come to them in very diverse forms. So what does that mean by harmonizing? It means that they recode all of the data in the original data sets into a common template, which means a common variable list. And that harmonization work is guided by a detailed set of rules that have been developed and refined at LIS over a period of many years. The purpose of the harmonization, of course, is to enable research across countries and over time that's as meaningful as possible. The process of harmonization requires a delicate balance of art and science and also a lot of time. It's not unusual for the LIS team to spend several weeks or even months harmonizing a single data set. At regular intervals, the LIS data team pauses the harmonization process in order to update the template or the variable list. That's a very labor-intensive process, and they do that in order to account for changing survey designs, the incremental addition of more diverse countries, and the development of new methods related to data cleaning, editing, imputation, and the like. The LIS staff also creates, for each harmonized data set, creates comprehensive documentation, and that's available on the LIS website in a searchable database. In the fourth step, the team there double checks the harmonized data using a combination of internal checks and checking against external sources, and they create national level indicators. And in the final step, they make the harmonized microdata available to researchers through a remote execution system, and they provide access to aggregated data via user-friendly pathways. In just a moment, I'm going to tell you about these indicators and these multiple pathways. Let me pause to stress, to take a moment to stress that what has made LIS so valuable over the years is that it provides access for researchers to the microdata. Microdata in this context refers to data that are available at the level of the household and the persons in those households. There are many supranational organizations, such as the World Bank, the OECD, the ILO, and many UN agencies that provide data on inequality, poverty, and the like. But for the most part, they provide aggregated data, data available for countries as a whole, or perhaps disaggregated into key subgroups. But very few data providers give access to researchers to the underlying microdata, as we do at LIS. Having access to microdata enables researchers to study finely tailored subgroups, and it also enables them to carry out distributional analysis and to apply complex multivariate methods. Let me take a few moments to tell you about the data, a little bit about the users and services and products and research carried out at LIS. The LIS archive contains two distinct databases. One of them is known as the Luxembourg Income Study, or LIS database, and the other is called the Luxembourg Wealth Study, or LWS database, which we pronounce as LUS. So the LIS archive contains these two databases, the LIS database and the LUS database. The LIS database is the first and largest database of harmonized income microdata in existence. It was created with the launch of LIS in the early 1980s. It started with one data set from each of 6 countries and now contains more than 50 countries. The LIS database now includes approximately 400 data sets, and that's because from these 50-some countries, there are multiple data sets that are made available to users via repeated cross-sections. Many of the data sets start back in 1980, that was wave 1, and they're recollected every 3 to 5 years. The interval at the beginning was 5 years and reduced to 4 and then 3. And now the team is working on making available annual data as much as possible. The staff is now working on what we refer to as Wave 11, which is centered on 2018. The data from the Luxembourg Income Study database, as suggested by its full name, are focused on income, and the research, the large literature that's based on the LIS database, covers all kinds of research topics related to poverty, income inequality, a range of labor market outcomes, and also the effects of policies in the ways in which they shape these outcomes. The Luxembourg Wealth Study, or the LIS database, was the first database of harmonized wealth in existence. It was first launched in 2007, and today it includes 68 data sets from 19 countries. That includes data sets that are up now or in process. The LIS template was completely redesigned, and LIS was relaunched in 2016 in coordination with the Eurosystem's Household Finance and Consumption Survey, known as the HFCS. And that was a survey that was fielded by a network coordinated by the European Central Bank and run in several of the Eurozone countries. These data sets, which are known to be of high quality, many of them are now included in the LIS database. The wealth data, as suggested by the name, are used to study household assets, debt, and expenditures, wealth portfolios, and many other aspects of household wealth. And of course, also many of the studies are focused on the policies and institutions that shape the micro-level outcomes. This slide summarizes the countries that are included in the LIS and LIS databases, now 52 countries. While it's only 52 countries, these cover more than 65% of the world population and 85% of world GDP. As you can see here, the countries cross-cut several income levels, and they're classified here according to the World Bank scheme of income levels, which is based on per capita gross national income. The World Bank updates this classification every year. The 52 countries are as follows: 33 are high-income countries, 12 are middle-income countries, and 7 are 12 are upper middle-income countries, and 7 are lower middle-income countries. Briefly, for its first 2 decades, LIS focused only on data from high-income countries, and that was due largely to several factors. LIS's founders came from affluent countries, and that's where their knowledge was focused. And it was also the case that the data from the rich countries were much more available to the LIS team, especially in the form of microdata. In the early mid-2000s, the LIS leadership decided to invest in adding a large number of middle-income countries, and that shift in emphasis required a lot of learning on the part of the data team, and it also catalyzed a major revision of the data template. The growth and diversification of LIS continues, and a development that many, including me, find extremely exciting. In mid-2020, LIS will add 5 new countries: Iraq, Jordan, Somalia, Sudan, and Tunisia, and that is a result of a fruitful collaboration between LIS and the Economic Research Forum in Cairo. By the time this video is viewed, those data sets will be online, and I encourage you to explore them through the regular channels. There are multiple pathways to the data. Undoubtedly, the most important and the most innovative tool is what's known as LISI. LISI, which is definitely LIS's signature tool, is a remote execution system that was designed for LIS in the 1980s and has been upgraded many times. The main point is that LISI allows people to carry out detailed statistical work while working from their home offices all around the world. Registered users write computer code in SAS, SPSS, Stata, or R, and they paste that code into an interface known as the Job Submission Interface, or the GSI. Results are returned to users electronically, usually in a few minutes. Programs that would take longer to run locally, a complex program based on a merge of many data sets, which of course, if it would take longer on your home computer, it will obviously take longer to run through the LISI system. But in general, results come back in a matter of minutes. LISI imposes some restrictions. To prevent what's called unit record identification, that is, to ensure the confidentiality that we promise our data providers will do, the data sets cannot be viewed or printed. Nevertheless, LIS users are able to carry out sophisticated statistical analyses however they wish. LIS has also for many years made available the web tab, an online table maker, and the key figures. These do not require registration, and they give access to aggregates, to aggregates mostly indicators of poverty, inequality, average income levels, and so forth. And these are used widely by people who don't have the desire or the resources or the skills to access the microdata. In other words, people who don't use LISI and are only looking for a much more general version of the data. Both the web tab and the key figures will be upgraded, merged, and replaced by something called DART, which stands for Data Access Research Tool. That will be a sophisticated online table maker, including data visualization that hasn't been allowable or enabled in the past. And that will be launched also in mid-2020. And by the time you're viewing this video, DART should be up and operational, and I encourage you to take a look. Okay, in addition to creating the data and making them available, LIS does a number of other things, which I'll mention rather briefly. The LIS team spends a lot of time supporting the active users. The registered microdata users now number about 1,000. There have been about 8,000 unique users since we started counting in 2007. LIS hosts training workshops and produces self-teaching materials, and as I mentioned, provides these tools for non-technical users, and DART is the next generation. LIS is increasingly a core source of data for other data providers. So I've given some examples here. In other large organizations, the World Bank, UNU Wider in Helsinki, the OECD, and the World Inequality Lab at the Paris School of Economics, when they build their databases, which are mostly various forms of aggregated data, to make those available to their users, among the main data sources that they use are the LIS data, and in fact, the POVCalNet tool from the World Bank and the World Income Inequality Database will only take data from the original data sources or from LIS. LIS also contributes to institutional flagship reports and media outlets. The LIS team has provided analyses, tables, figures, text for many reports that have been produced in recent years by the World Bank, the OECD, and several UN agencies, and also reports in some major media outlets. In the last decade or so, with so much interest in inequality in many, many countries, the demands upon the LIS team have really grown greatly. LIS also sponsors a range of research activities. The team puts together a quarterly newsletter called Inequality Matters, which synthesizes research findings created by the data team and also by many of the data users who contribute research briefs based on their work. There's a visiting scholar program, a working paper series, downloadable full-text papers, now 850. They also host periodic research and user conferences. And every few years, the LIS leadership produces a book, either edited or authored. In 2013, this book was published, Income Inequality, Economic Disparities and the Middle Class in Affluent Countries. That was edited by me and my colleague, Marcus Yanti. That was the first time that LIS gathered studies specifically on inequality. And in preparing this book, we commissioned 17 studies, all based on the LIS and LUS data and demonstrating a huge variety of types of research that can be done using the data. In my remaining 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a brief empirical presentation that includes some illustrative figures, 8 to be precise, and my purpose is to provide a brief look at the types of analyses that can be carried out using the LIS and LUS microdata. All of these figures include cross-national results, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus our attention on some findings from the United States. I've organized these 8 figures around 4 questions, as you'll see in just a moment, and it's important to note for the purpose of this presentation, these figures demonstrate rather simple descriptive analyses. The vast literature that's based on the LIS and LUS data make use of much more complex and sophisticated analytic tools. The first question, how does income inequality vary across high-income countries? Has it increased since the 1980s in most high-income countries? Has pre-tax and transfer income inequality increased, or post-tax and transfer income inequality, or both? This figure offers a portrait of income inequality in non-elderly households in 15 high-income countries at approximately 2016. The figure presents inequality using 2 income definitions. The first is household income after taxes and transfers are taken into account. Income researchers refer to this as disposable household income, and this includes income from the labor market and from capital, plus private and public income transfers minus income taxes paid. This amount is reported by the survey respondents. The second definition is household income before the taxes and transfers are captured. This amount, which is widely referred to as market income, is calculated mechanically by subtracting income transfers received and adding the taxes back in. In this figure, inequality is measured by the widely used Gini coefficient, in which a higher value represents a more unequal distribution. Here, inequality of disposable household income is reported in the blue bars and inequality of market income in the red bars. So let's first take a look at disposable household income. We see that the highest level of income inequality among these 15 countries is reported in the US at 0.38, and the lowest level is reported in 3 Nordic countries, Finland, Norway, Denmark, all with much lower inequality at 0.25. When we turn to inequality of market income, which is substantially higher everywhere, a fairly similar story emerges. The US again reports the highest level of inequality, now tied with the United Kingdom. However, some other countries shift rank, and the Nordic countries no longer stand out as exceptionally egalitarian. A key benefit of this analytic framework, one that's commonly used at LIS, is it allows us to consider the extent to which governments redistribute income via taxation and income transfers. It's common in this field to consider the difference between these two inequality indicators, literally the difference between the length of the red and blue bars, as a measure, a proxy for redistribution. So through that lens, we can see why the inequality of disposable household income, inequality in the income that households actually have, we can see why that inequality is so high in the United States. Market income inequality, inequality generated mainly from the labor market, is high, and redistribution is modest, bordering on meager. This slide depicts changes using the same two measures in the last 3 decades, that is between 1985 and 2016. And note that here I report results only from 10 of the 15 countries in the prior slide. That's simply due to data availability at the earlier point in time. These results indicate a common pattern in 8 of these 10 countries. That is, all except for the Netherlands and Israel. In these 8 countries, inequality increased both before and after accounting for taxes and transfers. In all 8 cases, the increase in disposable household income inequality was less than the increase with respect to market income, indicating that in all 8 of these countries, redistributive mechanisms mitigated the rising inequality generated in the market. The second question that I'm going to discuss today is a related one. We hear a lot about the hollowing out of the middle. During the last 3 decades, what exactly has taken place in the middle of the income distribution? Has the size of the middle shrunk? It's important to note that there is no one definition of the middle class among scholars, policymakers, nor the general public. This figure uses a definition that's relatively common in this literature on the economics of the middle class. Households are defined here as middle class if their disposable household income falls between 50% and 150% of their country's median disposable household income. The lower boundary, 50%, corresponds to the poverty threshold used by governments in many high-income countries and often in cross-national research. The upper boundary, 150% of the median, is essentially arbitrary. I chose it because it produces population shares of affluent persons that are largely in line with popular perceptions. So let's first look at our original group of 15 countries going back 3 decades. This slide is set in 1985. You can see here that in the middle of 1980s, the shares of the population that were situated within the middle class are captured in the red portions of the bars, and to the left of the middle class are the shares of persons who are poor, shown in the light purple, and to the right, the shares that are affluent, shown in light blue. The countries are ordered to reflect ascending middle class size from top to bottom in the figure. In 1985, among these countries, note that the US reported the smallest middle class. Only 59% of persons in the US, fewer than 2 in 3, lived in middle class households. So some 30 years ago, the US was already home to an unusually small middle class, one that was substantially smaller than that in many other high-income countries. Now, in this figure, we turn our attention to the present. This slide is set in 2016, as was the very first slide that I showed you. The population shares are presented in this figure using the same framework and the same country ordering. So has the middle hollowed out, as we often hear? Is that a widespread pattern? Our results indicate that yes, the dominant pattern has been a shrinking middle class. If you compare these two pictures, you'll see in 14 out of these 15 countries, the share of the population situated in the middle declined. The exception is Australia, where the middle class grew by about 1 percentage point. The magnitude of change was, however, remarkably varied. In 7 of these 14 countries, the size of the middle fell by a substantial 8 to 11 percentage points. In 5 countries, it fell by 3 to 5 percentage points. In 2, the middle remained essentially the same size, declining by less than 1 percentage point. The overtime result in the United States is somewhat surprising. The US is in that last group in which the middle class was nearly stable in size over the last 3 decades. Yet, in the US, the stability in middle class size, the absence of shrinkage, offers little reason to celebrate given the exceptionally small size of the middle class at the start and end of this time period. Finally, in those countries where the middle class did decrease, we asked, where did they go? Did the population portions that exited the middle class go up or down? The answer is that there was no single pattern. In 9 of the 14 countries where the middle class shrank by any amount, a larger percentage of persons moved down into poverty than up into affluence. In the other 5 of those countries, we see the reverse. A larger share of the population moved up than slid down. Question 3 for today. How do contemporary patterns of income inequality differ between high and middle income countries? In the interest of time, let me just point out one key finding in this figure, which duplicates the first figure that I showed you, but now with a mix of 27 high and middle income countries at about 2013. The key finding is that many middle income countries have even more unequal income distributions than the most unequal affluent countries. Note that in 5 of the countries included in this expanded figure, inequality of disposable household income is even higher than it is in the United States. And those countries include South Africa and 4 Latin American countries, Panama, Brazil, Peru, and Guatemala. Here's a second figure, reporting inequality in the same 27 countries. Here, for the first time, we shift to depict income in absolute, not relative terms. Now income is expressed in international dollars, which are adjusted for price levels. This approach allows us to note that comparing inequality measures using measures like the Gini, comparing inequality levels using measures like the Gini, obscures a crucial reality that income levels themselves vary dramatically, and the LIS data allow us to see that. So this figure depicts household income at each country's 10th percentile, the left part of the line, and each country's 90th percentile, the right point on the line. So here we see, for example, that the 90th percentile household in South Africa reports household income equivalent to the 10th percentile in Switzerland. In other words, using the LIS data, we can assess inequality not only within countries, but across countries. The last question that I'll turn our attention to today is this one. What do we know about the distribution of wealth across households in high-income countries? To what extent are income and wealth jointly distributed across households? This table presents equality of income and wealth in 6 countries. Both the income and wealth results come from the LIS database. The table highlights 2 stark realities. One is that in these countries, and it's true in many others, wealth inequality is much greater than is income inequality. The second is that wealth inequality in the United States is extraordinarily high. The final slide depicts the joint distribution of income and wealth in the same 6 countries shown in the prior slide. In each country block, households are distributed into 25 groups. So horizontally, they're divided according to their wealth quintile, and vertically according to their income quintile. Darker shades of blue represent higher values. So in the US, for example, we see that 12% of households fall into the highest income quintile and the highest wealth quintile, and 6.5% of households fall into the lowest income quintile and the lowest wealth quintile. Overall, what we see, we can see that from the dark diagonal line. Overall, what we see is that income and wealth inequality, while distinct facets of economic inequality, are correlated, and in some countries more than others. You might note, by the way, that a generic version of this image, known as a heat map, is used as the visual logo of the Stone Center. Most people don't know the origin of our logo, but now you do. I thank you for your attention, and I encourage you to explore the LIS website, which provides an extraordinary amount of rich information. And of course, please visit the Stone Center website as well.